Special thanks to N-Savers for sponsoring our 125,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. If you want to find out how you can win one of 6 lightsabers, check the pinned comment down below.
Hello. Our story begins inside the Jedi Temple, where Anakin woke up from another dream. It wasn't a nightmare, but it was the 3rd time that he had been woken up during the night. He looked over the time and saw that there would be 6 more hours until the sun actually rose over Coruscant. He slammed his head back down into a pillow and looked at the ceiling. The dream he woke up from was one of him as a Jedi, like he was now, but the Jedi he was resembled the one from his dreams as a boy. As a boy, he envisioned a smuggler-esque Jedi look for him, one where he wore more than just Jedi robes. It was a colorful palette of yellow and blue, similar to his pod racer, and he used a golden lightsaber. It was a wonderful look in his opinion, and he was what a Jedi should be. Anakin twisted over and shut his eyes, hoping to return to the dream. He hated Tatooine, but there was something oddly alluring about the nostalgia he held for it. Not the slavery or the heat or the sand, but there was a feeling he longed for. Perhaps it was what he considered as home. He hadn't yet made himself home inside the temple as it was. He had and he hadn't, but for the most part he had just been existing here, going through the mundane day-to-day life that the Jedi had made their own. Anakin wished for some adventure and blah blah blah, no adventure that, no excitement this. But where was the heart? The Jedi were supposed to be protectors, at least that's what they promoted themselves as. They were the Knights of the Republic, and yet no one saw that. Anakin slammed his pillow over his head and tried to go back to sleep. He was tired, but he longed for more freedom. Then he became more awake. Eventually, he decided he'd just train inside the training room. But as he swung his legs over the bed, he realized he had done that before. Every time something like this happened, he resorted to doing the same thing. It no longer was fulfilling him. Skywalker then had an idea. Perhaps he could... No, that wouldn't be right. It was an idea he had every so often, one that Palpatine encouraged 4 years before. Anakin didn't do it then, but now, instead of leaving on someone else's word, he could do it on his own. Anakin looked over to the side of the room and walked towards the window. He could leave, and he could be what a Jedi was meant to be. The idea of being a Jedi hero was much more alluring to him being stuck here and being a no one. Skywalker eventually got everything he wanted together and grabbed the Jedi shuttle, one of the larger ones, turned off its tracker, and then departed from the temple. Most of Nolan was awake, so they wouldn't find out he had left until the morning. At 17 years old, this was a bit of a scary undertaking, but he believed in his own decision-making. This could be the life he always was destined for. He didn't know where he would go in the Outer Rim, but he considered going to Tatooine first. He had a bone to pick with Watto. However, he thought that perhaps he could do something more. His ideas centered around what it could mean to free the slaves of the Outer Rim. There certainly were a lot of them on Tatooine, but there were more slaves on Kessel and Zygeria. Instead of going home first, he could do something more. Anakin really liked the idea of going to one of these planets and starting a revolution. He didn't want to just free his mom, but he wanted to free all the slaves. His adolescent mind found brilliance in this. He figured that as a Jedi he could waltz into the spice mines of Kessel, free the slaves, and then move on to other slave rings. Anakin knew that once they were freed, he could lead revolutions across the Outer Rim, one that could save the people from their criminal overlords. When he landed on Kessel, he parked the ship far away from the mines and traversed on foot to the actual location of the mines. When he arrived, he could see thousands of people from across the galaxy march into their chambers of heat, exhaustion, and suffering. Anakin's anger grew. He couldn't stand for what he was looking at. This was atrocious. He made his way down from the overlook and got to the ground level. As he started looking for the command station, he was jumped by a couple of guards. He defended himself by cutting through them, but the gunshots alerted the rest of the facility. Skywalker ran through, passing by slaves, looking for a way to turn off all their locks. He knew that simply breaking them could cause electrocution, something that could kill them if it was turned on. They watched as he sped past them, a horde of guards surrounding him. As Skywalker stopped to defend himself, he was blasted in the face with a pike, one that knocked him out completely. When he woke up, he had chains over his hands and a welt on his face. Standing over him were a couple of the Syndicate leaders, overseeing the operation. They called him Jedi Scum, as they told him that he'd be working in this mines until the day he died. All of these slaves would watch their hope die, through simply watching the mighty Jedi fall victim to their power. Skywalker lunged at the leader before he was captured with a light whip, one wrapping around his neck and dragging him to the ground. A visible wound of heat showed up before it was deactivated, and he was forced to work with everyone else. As Anakin was put to work, He saw that all of his looking for freedom was in vain. It got him nothing and nowhere. Now he was stuck with no aid, no allies, and once again, a slave. It was a 180 in terms of lifestyle, but also in terms of what he expected to come from this. Anakin didn't want to be a slave again, he wanted to free the slaves. What made this experience worse was the looks of disdain he got from the other slaves. They looked at him as if he was a monster. Some of the physically larger ones would walk into him or shove him to the ground, calling him a Force faker or a Jedi fool. All of his excitement to free these people now in vain. As he was put to work, he ended up next to a Zygerian man. Skywalker hated this more than anything. Those wretched people all deserved to be inmates of their own system. The Zygerian was the most peppy out of everyone. His uniform was clean, for the most part, and he seemed very optimistic at the least. He walked over and helped Skywalker off the ground, after having been shoved over again. The man told Anakin to not let this get to his head. Slaves always picked on the new kid on the block. It was in their nature. Skywalker could tell something was off, but he thanked him. The Zygerian nodded his head and joyfully got back to work. Anakin picked up his tool and followed in sync with him. The Zygerian man asked for Anakin's name, and it was told. Skywalker asked for his name, and he told Anakin that his name was Caesar. Skywalker was confused about how or why he would be in the mines. Caesar laughed. He told Anakin that he had a bit too loud of a voice back home. He didn't fundamentally disagree with the idea of slavery. Truthfully, Caesar believed it was a necessary institution. It built his people. He just believed that the Zygerians were a bit too cruel with it. So he spoke out, and the Queen sent him here. Caesar believed it was a valuable lesson to learn. He expressed that in a couple weeks he'd be shipped off and head back home. This was simply supposed to be a lesson for him, according to the Queen. Anakin asked how long he'd been here, and it was only a month. How odd. Anakin got to work with the crack of a light whip behind him. As the hours turned to days, Anakin was no longer the new kid on the block, and he could focus on how to escape. He didn't make any friends, and quite a few of the slaves told him to sleep with one eye open. If he wasn't careful, he might wake up without an eye or a leg or an arm, because what use was a slave that couldn't work? Just a good way to get a Jedi executed for leaving them to rot in the Outer Rim for so long. Anakin's only friend was someone he, in a way, absolutely hated. Caesar was pretentious as he was ignorant. Most of the slaves left him alone because he minded his own business, but talking with him was a different story. Like Anakin, Caesar came from this upper-class world. Zygeria and Coruscant were far removed from the scummy landscape of Kessel. He spoke to Anakin like these animals in the mines with them were less than sentient, suggesting that if Anakin didn't have his Jedi teachings, he would see them as lesser beings rather than worth his time. Skywalker tried to get his only ally to forget about Zygeria, but Caesar was fiercely loyal to his way of life. He now understood why the Zygerians were such cruel owners, and he wished to repent before the Queen. The trouble for Anakin is that, despite the other slaves leaving him alone, they didn't want to talk to him. They saw him as lesser. Even though he was trying to help them, he clearly wanted some self-fulfilling prophecy to be fulfilled. He wasn't here for them. If he was, he would have come with other allies. Skywalker's hope was at rock bottom, and he started to realize that if he wanted any chance of making a slave rebellion start, he needed to be the anchor. His only ally, or the only person that actually spoke to him, started to lose his own hope too. Caesar was supposed to be freed from Castle 2 months and 2 weeks after his conviction, but it had been 2 months and 3 weeks. He tried speaking to the guards, but they didn't care for his excuses. He tried getting in touch with the owners, but they didn't care for what a lowly slave had to say. He was expendable, and clearly the Queen thought he was too. Caesar was so hopeful that he could return home and embrace his people's way of life, but that was no longer the case. He became a mute, which for Anakin meant that he no longer had anyone to talk to. Skywalker had been here on Kessel for an entire month by this point. The Jedi were looking for him, but they wouldn't ever anticipate him coming to Kessel or even going back to the Outer Rim. Obi-Wan was restlessly searching for Skywalker as Quinlan and Ayla aided Kenobi in the search, but they were starting to lose hope that they'd ever find him. Without Caesar, Anakin sat in his own mind, slaving away in the mines for 12 hours a day, with little food and a very sore body. He continued looking for a way out of this predicament, but everywhere he looked, it felt hopeless. Anakin then calmed himself. The best way to get a rebellion going was to find allies. He needed people that had been here to join him. The only issue is, the person who technically led all the slaves was a Trandoshan beast, a massive 550-pound lizard that towered even over the other Wookiees in the tunnels. He had a full name, but he went by Ort. He was a very nasty creature, and Anakin had to figure out a way to get him on his side. Anakin initially started with trying to give him rations, but Ort just took and never said thank you. If the Jedi wanted to gain allies, he needed to earn them through something more than giving food. Skywalker, after going a full 24 hours without eating, decided that he was done with trying to play a Jedi's game. If he wanted allies, he needed to fight this Trandoshan and beat him in a fight. But realistically, what was Anakin supposed to do against a monster like Ort? Only one way to find out. Caesar was still mute by this point. He didn't want to speak, and he lost all desire to say anything. Regardless of the betrayal of Caesar, Anakin one day was working in the mines and saw Ort walking past his station, and slid his foot out in front of him. The Trandoshan wasn't paying attention, and he slipped over Anakin's foot. He slammed into the ground and turned around hissing, demanding to know who did it. Skywalker stepped forward, asking if there was a problem. The Trandoshan got back to his feet and stood up, sliding his shoulders back and buffing up his chest to make him appear even larger than he already was. Anakin asked what the issue was, and the Trandoshan told him to think about what he was doing. This wouldn't end well for him. Skywalker grinned and stepped up again, paling in comparison to the massive lizard. The guards watched. If Skywalker died, they wouldn't have to worry about it. If he lived, then he'd be punished. The guards didn't care for what Ort did. He was actually liked for a slave. Because Anakin didn't stand down, Ort came forward, swinging his massive hands. Skywalker ducked out of the way and threw his hands at the block, but he was thrown backwards. The swings were powerful and they surged with energy. Anakin avoided where he could, but he needed to strike back. Anakin noted that Ort had a bandage on his thigh from a burn. He slammed his leg out and clipped it, which made Ort angrier. Anakin slid away, but Ort's reach was unlike anyone else's, as he grabbed Anakin by the back of the collar and pulled him before smashing him in the face. Anakin fell backwards before being grabbed and hoisted into the air. Anakin looked down as he squirmed, like a bug in Ort's hands. The Trandoshan asked if he had any last words, and Skywalker smiled, asking if he liked spice before throwing a handful into Ort's eyes. He dropped Skywalker, and Anakin threw his hands forward and released a wave of the Force upon impact, tossing Ort backwards. The guards were pleased with the fight so far, but once Anakin started winning, they had no intention of letting him finish Ort. The best part about this move is that most of the slaves by this point had forgotten that Skywalker was a Jedi. They just saw Anakin hit Ort, and the power behind his hit threw Ort off his feet. Skywalker saw the guards coming and used his skills to avoid one before grabbing his staff and throwing it into another's neck. Ort looked over and saw Anakin fighting off the guards. He then realized that perhaps the fight wasn't for him, but to get the guards to come closer. Most of the guards usually use a shock collar on everyone, just to get people to cooperate, but in circumstances of fights, they would just try to immobilize the individual that won, so they wouldn't have to shut down the entire assembly line of workers. Skywalker avoided and fought back before a stun round was fired into him, and it clobbered him in the back. The leader of the operation walked out and told everyone to get back to work, or they'd be made into examples. Ort looked down and watched the guards drag Anakin through the dirt. Skywalker wouldn't be seen for a week, as he was put into the hot box. It was a punishment system to kill or demoralize an individual. The hot box is exactly what it sounded like. It was a tiny room with miniature vents, smaller than a loth cat's eye, and placed next to the Inferno room, so it heated up really quickly. Actually, it was always hot. Inmates were given a little bit of water daily. If the slave consumed too much water too quick, they'd die. Skywalker would suffer for the week and be forced to return to labor once it was finished. But there was a benefit to his survival. Caesar was once again speaking, because he and Ort had started speaking. Ort wasn't usually one for games, but when he realized that Anakin wasn't trying to fight him, rather use him to get the guards into the action, he thought it was a brilliant play. He didn't realize that this was never the actual intention, but Ort didn't need to know that. The other slaves respected Anakin's grit. Most of them had seen Ort kill slaves in a fight when he first arrived. Ort showed up and he was picked on by a group of Wookiees. He fought all three and killed all three of them with his bare hands. It's why the Wookiees were separated from him, because he could kill them without much of a struggle. After the incident, Ort became feared, and it was that fear that elicited loyalty. Now it was semi-transferred to Anakin, because he technically won the fight. When he returned, Caesar was very optimistic. He told Anakin that he was very hopeful that he would survive the fight. Now that he had, it felt like maybe there was some hope. Caesar was also very apologetic for cutting him off before. As he explained, it was very disheartening when he realized that once he wasn't on Zygeria, he was no longer one of them. He went from being a member of society to an expendable piece of hardware. The burden of becoming such was a hard thing to grasp, and so he was apologetic for avoiding Anakin for so long. But Anakin was understanding. The two of them had spoken before. Aside from being a Jedi, Caesar knew Anakin was once a slave when he was a boy. The conditions on Tatooine were never this bad, but now there were whispers of trying to escape. In the slave barracks, these ideas would be explored more. Anakin and Ort would shake on their fight. This wasn't Anakin conceding. He still technically won the fight, and the only reason Ort shook on it was because he believed there were other motives. Anakin knew he could screw Ort out of this, but he needed the muscle. To have someone as big as him in his corner was invaluable. Ort was only willing to ally so he could get out of this wretched place. He'd been here for 3 whole years. But Ort, along with some other longtime members, knew some key locations to set the escape at. They just needed proper planning. They'd have to wait until a new waves of slaves were transported in. With every new batch, the system would reset, but only for 20 seconds. The only reason is the owners would place new collars on their new products and then reset the system so it included all the new frequencies. Anakin suggested that they needed to divide this up. They couldn't get caught short-handed. Ort liked where his head was at, but the system was specifically designed so that other units in the mines couldn't communicate. When they made their push, they needed to hope that the other batches would too. If not, they were in this alone. However, this operation couldn't be done overnight. Ort said they needed months of planning, and they needed to be sure they had everything set. So that's what happened. Anakin, Ort, and Caesar became the figureheads of this little resistance, and once they decided on when to make their move, Caesar and Ort made requests to transfer to other units in the mines. This would allow them to have about a week or so to prepare everything for the next move. They'd be able to rally 2 more units to their side before the actual rebellion began. Anakin was 18 and a half at this point. He had spent 9 months inside the spice mines of Kessel. The Jedi had given up their search, aside from Obi-Wan, and Skywalker was preparing to lead one of the biggest slave revolutions ever seen on Kessel. As the day came closer, the tension inside the mines were higher than ever before. There were some issues leading up to it, like members that wanted to inform the guards something was coming, but they were killed. And then the day came. Like a rising storm, it started with separate fights between slaves across the work line. Then the guards came to stop it, and as they did, they were taken down. They didn't have much time because the guards could inform command that something was happening, but there were no cameras to visually confirm that the guards had been taken down. The few slaves that took out the guards stole their uniforms and made a break for the command room. The reason they wore the guard uniforms is so they could blend in. Skywalker and a number of other disguised slaves ran through the corridors, running past actual guards who saw the commotion and chased after them. They essentially said that there'd been a break-in at the comms and they needed reinforcements. The other guards followed, but once they got to the command room, they were turned on, cut down, and Skywalker broke through the doors. His allies chased in after him, and they started tearing everything apart. As they were doing this, Anakin saw his lightsaber hanging in the commander's office, where he pulled it down and continued forward. As they were in the command room, they spotted Ort taking charge in one section of the mine, with Caesar and his unit doing the same in another section. The new slaves were also joining in the fun. The best part about Kessel is their methods were so cruel that they didn't need a surplus of guards, so once the revolt started, there was no slowing it down. Anakin told his group to continue taking down the command room. He would gather with Ort and Caesar. As he ran from the room, he ignited his weapon and cut down a couple guards on the way out. He eventually reunited with his allies and they fought off the remaining guards, taking their blasters, staves, or anything else they might have before killing them all. There were no prisoners, and Anakin faced a light whip enough times to forget about the Jedi Code. As they continued forward, they were able to rout the remaining guardsmen and kill anyone else who didn't get a chance to escape. Kessel had fallen. The spice mines were offline, and to ensure no one would ever return to enslave people and force them to work here, the slaves prepared an ignition switch that would melt the mines. Using 2 Gazanti cruisers, the ones that transported the new batches here, the rebels broke themselves up. Once they won, and before they melted the reactor of the mines, Anakin got up before everyone, Ort and Caesar on his sides, and told them all that they had won the battle, but there was a war that could be won. He wasn't much for rousing words, but if they wanted to continue fighting the fight, then he'd be honored if they would join him as they went to their next location to free more slaves like themselves. His entire motivation was to ending the crime syndicate's grip on the people of the Outer Rim. They could win this together. Surprisingly, to Anakin, more than half of the newly freed slaves were willing to continue this fight. to sacrifice themselves so there was a chance for their brothers and sisters across the Outer Rim to have a shot at freedom. Anakin, Ort, and Caesar spoke quietly amongst each other about their next target, and despite sounding biased, Caesar wanted to target Zygeria. It was a slave empire. If they were set on starting a slave rebellion, then they needed to go to the heart of slavery in the galaxy. If they could wipe out the Zygerians, then they could potentially rally more to their side. Also, as Caesar indicated, Zygeria was the furthest separated from the Hutts, Black Suns, and Pikes. Taking them down would be a lot easier than any of the other ones, because they were at the very least closer with each other. Anakin turned to Ort, and he said that they could rally together a raiding party of Trandoshans that were opposed to the slave trade. He knew a bunch of them that liked hunting for sport, but there were those who disagreed with the fundamentals of the trade, and on top of that, there were those that were loyal to Ort and would follow him if they ever got the chance to do so, even if it meant going to Zygeria. The trio entered the ship and it was lifted off from the surface, and as they moved through the atmosphere, the mines were detonated and destroyed for good. A plan was hatched before they ever got anywhere near Zygeria. Caesar, being the only individual in the entire rebellion to actually be from Zygeria, knew the layout and the best way to achieve victory. They had a bunch of colonies outside the main planet, but without support from the capital, those colonies would have to submit. Their power grid was reliant on support from their leadership. He suggested if they wanted to strike at the Zygerians, they needed to kill the queen. Since there were so many of them, they could act fast. But there was also one little issue. The people of Zygeria were all like him. They all supported slavery to some degree. There were of course the few who had their issues with the cruelty of it, but for the most part they were content with slavery. The practice built their empire, so if they wanted to lead a successful rebellion on Zygeria, they needed to have someone ready to stand in place of the queen. Caesar did suggest himself for this, but he said he would likely die if he did it. The chances are, people would turn against him once the rebellion quieted down, but he was willing to take that sacrifice. As long as the people didn't have to suffer the way they had in the mines of Kessel, then he would do it. The other two wouldn't get in his way if that's what he wanted to do. Throughout their trip through hyperspace, they diverged a plan. It was a basic seizure of the city. The former slaves would go in on chains. Anakin and Caesar would lead them to the royal palace, and they would capture it. Everything inside the capital ran to the palace. It was a sound plan, and they acted on it immediately. The sequence followed as such. The rebels were put in the chains, and they landed. They were marched out and brought into the royal palace, Anakin acting on behalf of Jabba, and this being a gift from Tatooine. No one knew about the rebellion on Kessel, so they would be able to operate without suspicion. Once they got into the palace, the shackles were dropped, and the rebellion commenced again. Luckily, on Zygeria, there were a lot more weapons to choose from, so hundreds of slaves from Kessel took over the entire palace within the span of an hour. Caesar and Ort took the throne room, while Anakin led the rest of the ground assault. Ort's Trandoshan reinforcements came in like an undertaker, and ripped the Zygerian guards to shreds. Their elite hunting skills were far too much for measly guards of the palace. There wasn't anything the Zygerians could do but besiege their own temple. Caesar and the queen went before the people and he gave them an ultimatum: free the slaves or she would perish. The guards didn't care, they wanted to secure their empire. The holdout from the guards would last longer than anticipated. Anakin, Caesar, and Ort would have to resort to doing nighttime raids on guards, barracks, and outposts. The siege turned into a month-long fiasco, where the Zygerians refused to give up an inch. The key to the success of the rebels was a move made by their leaders. Anakin, Ort, and Caesar took an elite group of Trandoshans and other slaves to a Zygerian colony, where they would blindside their leadership, wiping it out entirely. It'd be here that Anakin would meet a Twi'lek slave named Maya Val. She didn't care much for him upon first meeting, aside from being grateful for their freedom. But the slaves at this colony were used as bartering tools during the siege, so up until their actual freedom, they saw the slave rebellion on Zygeria as ineffective. The rest of the crime families were well aware of the rebellion at this point, but none of them were willing to help the Zygerians. Their collapse would aid their own expansion, so let the Zygerian Empire fall again, and allow the rebels to continue growing. It gave the other syndicates time to prepare for what was surely to come. Regardless, the slaves from the colony were discreetly transported back to the capital, and when dawn rose, they attacked. The guards that had been holding the city were attacked on two sides, one from the palace and one from outside their gates. It was a slaughter, but it was one led for freedom of all sentience in the Outer Rim. The battle itself, the one that had been building for a month, ended in under an hour. With victory came more questions. Their fighting force had gone from hundreds holding a palace to thousands in control of a fallen empire. Caesar wanted to continue fighting the good fight with his allies, but he knew that there was nothing he could do. If he stayed with Anakin and Ort, his people could revert back to their old ways, and due to the siege drawing out for more than a month, the people, especially those like Caesar, were willing to try a new method. The Jedi destroyed their empire by taking away their slaves. Now their slaves had done the same to them. If they could be put on the life support by simply losing one attribute of their empire, then perhaps it was time for something new. Caesar would take the mantle and try and fix a broken system. He did wish his friends a farewell, believing that he would die before the next time he saw them. This led the slave rebellion, now in the thousands, to the next largest population, which was on Tatooine. Anakin had his personal concerns about attacking Tatooine. He didn't want his mother to be harmed in the crossfire, so he went to the planet to quote-unquote scout out everything before the battle started. He was able to track down his mother, kill Watto, and find her at the Lars homestead. Due to him being there, he was able to protect her from an attack made by the Tusken Raiders, one that highlighted not just the beginning of a siege on Tatooine and Jabba the Hutt, but the beginning of the Clone Wars. Warring with Jabba wouldn't be the same as the previous battle. Jabba was a Hutt, and they would fight until the bitter end. He had the full backing of now Hutta, so he would continue supporting this war effort. Skywalker and Ort knew that if they didn't make their fight more marketable, then they would lose. Luckily, they knew just how to do it. The fight with the crime lords would lose them profit, but inversely, the rebels could steal and/or capitalize off of said profits if they won. So if people joined this rebellion, then they could earn credits. It was no secret the crime families had all the money in the Outer Rim. But if they were ousted from power, then who got that money? The people. That was the message Skywalker and Ort were spreading. With the Clone Wars on the rise, it'd be the perfect way to add fuel to the fire. The criminal organizations would be looking for alliances with the CIS or the Republic. Why give them a chance to screw over the citizens again and again? Due to the Hutts fortifying Jabba, he had a full military force protecting him, and this showed the rebels that the Hutts were actually scared. They knew they had a losing fight, and they knew there were more slaves and the lower class people than there were of them. All it took was a spark, and it would all burn. Despite Skywalker's rebellion finding home on Tatooine, they didn't make any strikes. They learned the layout and made their alliances. Ort was the biggest contributor to this. There were new leaders within this unit that were able to add to their allies, but the war would give people more inspiration to join. The rebellion started on Tatooine when a transport was bombed, killing a couple dozen Hutt guardsmen. The rest of the war for the planet would consist of guerrilla warfare. Despite the general group of slaves not knowing the territory all that well, there were people willing to join the fight on behalf of the rebellion to aid them. People that knew the layout better than the guards from Nal Hutta or other Hutt territories. These people could tell that Jabba was getting antsy. He was afraid, and a fearful daimyo made for an exciting target. The three major cities across Tatooine began rising up. As the war for Tatooine continued, Skywalker and Ort received news from Caesar on Zygeria. The people had given up on the slave trade. Their empire had been badly damaged by supporting something that didn't support them. They won. He'd be sending reinforcements to Tatooine by the end of the rotation. This was much needed news, because at the moment, despite using guerrilla tactics, the Hutts were coming back harder than ever before. They purchased weapons from the CIS and even struck up a deal with Dooku to defend their territory. As a result, the CIS got access to some of Jabba's hyperspace lanes. However, Dooku wasn't going to send them a full army. He gave them supplies to support his cause. So Jabba ended up getting a handful of tanks, 3 units of droidekas, 1 division of B2s, and 3 divisions of B1s, which didn't sound like a lot, but it was more than enough. This immediately brought the rebellion to a standstill. Skywalker and his unit were leading most of the attacks, and they were pinned down. It'd be during this battle that he'd once again see Maya, the woman he saw from the Zygerian colony. She wasn't the leader of her unit, but she stuck to the rebellion and was contributing as a third in command of her unit. Her unit's counterattack saved a faulty assault, one that was strategically sound but countered by superior numbers and artillery. Across the city, as Anakin and Maya were getting familiar with each other in a battle against a division of B1s and tanks operated by Hutt allies, Ort was able to lead a successful attack on a Hutt armory and barracks. The Hutt troopers were killed, while their armory was raided. Ort continued forward to establish a foothold deeper into the city. The battle for Tatooine initially would have been finished in about a month and a half, but due to reinforcements from the Separatists, it continued on for another 4 months. Dooku continued sprinkling supplies over Jabba, not because he didn't have enough, but because he believed that if the slaves won, they wouldn't tell him no anyways. It didn't matter to him. Dooku was simply playing Jabba until his time ran out. The rebels continued pushing and pushing, but they continued to hit gridlock. Due to having survived and fought against the droids in her assaults, Maya was included in Skywalker's inner circle. With Caesar returning, that now made 4 of them. She made a point, one that suggested if the Hutts were pouring their resources into Tatooine, then what would say stop the rebels from attacking Nal Hutta and blindsiding their leadership? Ort was a little concerned with this. He liked the idea, but if they attacked and destroyed Nal Hutta, what would happen to the Hutt allies? No one knew. Before the Hutts took control, the Nile had control over everything. If the bubble burst, would the Black Sun and Pikes unite to take them down? Caesar had an idea for that actually. He knew that they could politically play the Pikes into an alliance with Zygerria, one that would keep them from the war temporarily. Caesar had a really strong connection with the new government on Zygerria, so he could get it to work. At the same time, Ort would continue his ground operations here on Tatooine, since he was the most successful out of the 4. Maya and Anakin would take a unit to Nal Hutta to blindside the Hutt clan. If they could isolate Jabba, then all he'd have is 0, and that'd make them easier pickings. There were also some smugglers that had connections on Coruscant, ones that could be used for wiping out 0 if need be. This rebellion was continuing to mount up, but if they truly wanted to have a successful war against the crime lords, then they needed to take down their leadership, so they split up. Caesar returned to Zygerria to turn the Pikes against the other crime lords, as Skywalker and Maya went to Nal Hutta to kill the Hutt leadership. They would first find and kill Mama the Hutt, the matriarch of some of the most powerful Hutt leaders, including Jabba, Rhoda, Gorga, 0, and Ebor. Maya had a real bone to pick with Mama the Hutt, so as they snuck into her abode, she stole Anakin's lightsaber and drove it through Mama's chest, and then started slashing and swiping away. Anakin had to pull her off the dead Hutt because she wouldn't stop. There was a past that Maya hadn't revealed to anyone about how she ended up in that Zygerrian colony, but her mother was enslaved, and Maya was born on Zygerria. She had never known a life of freedom, and she was 20 years old. The last few months since the fall of the Zygerrian Empire were her only few months of freedom in her life. She almost died on that colony too. If it weren't for the fall of the Queen, she would have died of starvation. Regardless, they had to continue going. With Mama dead, the rest of the Hutts were next. The rebels moved across the swamps and snuck into the small capital of Nal Hutta. It was nothing but a town. The people were all reliant on the Hutts, and once they were gone, this society would crumble. The rebels actually felt a little bad about this, but without these monsters gone, they wouldn't have a chance to win this war. Anakin and Maya led the rest of the group into the back entrance and they split up, Maya taking one half and Skywalker taking the other. They moved quickly through the facility, cutting down Gamorrean guards and doing away with any other trouble, such as bounty hunters. As they were going through, a massive explosion could be heard, and Skywalker's unit ran as fast as they could to the source of the explosion. When they came around the corner to the meeting room for the Hutts, it was blown to pieces, and Maya stepped out from around the corner with a pistol in her hands, before turning to the side and blasting it twice, killing 2 guards running their way. Anakin looked at her, as her eyes came back to him. He smiled, telling her that she missed one. His lightsaber ignited, and he walked over to one of the vile slugs crawling away from the fire, before Skywalker cut it down. Once he returned, she told him that she left him one behind on purpose. The unit abandoned Nal Hutta, and they made their way back for Tatooine. Instead of Jabba's palace, Ort was making his own moves. He set a blaze on the outskirts of town, one that had smoke plumes covering the moons. Ort was mimicking Skywalker and Maya's mission. He knew at any moment Jabba would be informed of the death of his rotten family. The Trandoshan moved with his unit as they crawled through the building. The squad split up entirely, each member entirely alone. They took down guards with their hands and quietly executed anyone they saw. Ort used his massive size to pick up Gamorrean guards and break their backs before sliding into Jabba's throne room, where he was surrounded by his closest allies. Bounty hunters of all the kind, just waiting for their chance to get a good payment from Jabba. Ort told all of them that they had one chance to live or die. Jabba's family was dead, and they had no funding. The bounty hunters looked to each other, and before they could make a decision, a communication came through, informing Jabba that his family was indeed dead, slaughtered on Nal Hutta. The bounty hunters realized they had been played, but Ort had no intention of actually allowing their scum to remain alive. His squad dropped their bombs throughout the throne room, and the entire chamber was blown to hell. Those who survived were executed. To serve the Hutts was to serve the devil, and therefore unforgivable. As Skywalker returned, he learned that the battle for Tatooine had been won. To make things better, thanks to a technical member of his unit, they transferred every ounce of credits that the Hutts possessed into their accounts. They had enough funding to truly wage war on the Outer Rim and free every slave. And that's what they did. With Caesar manipulating the Pikes out of a formal engagement, Ort, Maya, and Anakin were able to raise a military to drown the Black Suns. With the Hutts gone and no other support, the Black Suns rallied together their own military, and they decided that they would capture Pike territory and use it in their war against the rebels. What followed was a three-way war between the rebels, the Black Suns, and the Pikes. It completely disorganized the Outer Rim, which cut off the CIS and the Republic from using their trade routes. While both the CIS and Republic could very easily destroy a fleet or even an army from either one of these organizations, it wouldn't be worth their resources. They avoided the conflict at all costs. From afar, Anakin could watch the Jedi cave in on themselves and become warmongers, which was actually slightly painful for him to see, but he had since moved on from them. His focus was victory for the people of the Outer Rim, the war of which lasting longer than the Clone Wars. Despite Palpatine keeping his eye on the Outer Rim, he never found Skywalker. Anakin had pseudonyms to cover his tracks. This was mostly done for two reasons. He didn't want the Jedi coming out here and finding him, and he also didn't want his mother to be targeted. It was just a protection thing. He had a number of other names that people referred to him as. Only those closest to him knew him by Anakin. The Clone Wars would go out with a bang. The death of the Jedi and the death of the Emperor. Apparently, according to rumors, during Order 66, Mace Windu was on Kashyyyk, and afterwards at some point, he returned and killed the Emperor in a lightsaber duel. There were also rumors about the Jedi trying to restart their order on their home world, but no one knew. The Empire was in disarray and the Outer Rim was closing in on order. A main, or the main contributor to the Outer Rim War, lasting for so long, was the resilience of the Black Suns. They refused to lose, and they were really good at drumming up support for their movement. They did this through forcing people to believe they had their best intentions at heart, propaganda that insisted life was better before the rebellions, which was kind of true because it was war. Due to the Black Suns and Pikes wanting the same things, they, about a year into the war, allied up together, and it became a war between empires and people. It was grueling, but it was hard fought and won, with the final victory coming for the people at the Battle of Obadiah. It'd be the first battle in over 5 months that the original leaders would be together. Anakin, Ort, Caesar, and Maya would lead the final charge, the one that completely ended slavery and destroyed both remaining criminal empires in one fell swoop. Due to the empires being destroyed and due to the war, Maul would never turn to the Outer Rim for his support. He instead moved into the Mid-Rim and found little success. His journey would be miserable, but without Jedi or Sith, he'd find his own avenue to call his own. With victory falling over the Outer Rim, Anakin would gift Maya a Kalikori as a proposal, knowing that she never had one before. The two of them were obviously in love after fighting a 4-year war with each other. They just wanted to wait till the war was actually won. There was a lot of confusion on how to operate in the Outer Rim after the war came to an end, but the leaders had an idea. They would reunite the Outer Rim into one central emirate. Simply due to having a couple Outer Rim leaders, it was easier to call it the Outer Rim Emirates, until they could decide on how they would move forward in regard to the Empire. They didn't want to unite with something that would betray them, but the Empire seemingly was moving back into a republic. Without Palpatine, there wasn't a sturdy leader that could hold the mantle. As a result, the Outer Rim Emirates kept their distance and gave the Empire 5 years to get themselves together before they'd make a decision on where to go and who to ally with. The whole purpose of this initial setup was to allow the Outer Rim to flourish under the trusted leaders of the rebellion, before dividing up the Emirates into either the Empire or its own confederacy or republic, or whatever system they elected to go after. Ort, Caesar, Maya, and Anakin would continue representing the people of the Outer Rim for those 5 years, all of which having some stress. But thanks to the credits secured from the criminal organizations, they were able to pour funds into the Outer Rim, funds that hadn't been seen in over a millennium. The ascension of the Outer Rim was a wake-up call to the Empire, one that suggested if they didn't get themselves together, those savages from the Outer Rim would attack them. The people of the core regarded the people of the Outer Rim as lesser beings, but when the corporations descended into the Outer Rim, because they had a better chance to actually profit, the Empire realized that them being pretentious cost them time and credits. The Emirates would therefore flourish under the leadership of the original 4, and at the end of those 5 years, the Emirates would, by popular demand, keep its distance from the reinstated Republic. What followed were the Emirates dividing up into a parliamentary system, one that would allow for their side of the galaxy to flourish. Anakin and Maya would retire away from political life and relocate to Mara Dun due to its exclusiveness and start their own life. At some point they would leave the isolated planet, but for the time being, they were content with a life they had built for themselves. When they returned to societal life, the Outer Rim had changed greatly, and for the better, and they'd always keep their friends close. But no one in the jurisdiction of the Parliament was more content than Anakin, as he fulfilled the childhood dream of his by flying a yellow lightsaber and freeing the people of the Outer Rim. And that, my friends, is our grand tier request. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Django Fat Clone, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galavan Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir Willem 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewu 67, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tam, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Youngly Slayer 66, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, the main three first names, Darkseid 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. If you want to support me in other ways, you can check the Patreon. Cool things on there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So the main inspiration for this was the Planet of the Apes trilogy that I just watched. Anakin is Caesar, Ort is a combination of Buck and Rocket, and Caesar is Maurice. I think the rebellion becoming an accident is more befitting than just doing, oh, Anakin magically starts a rebellion. It's like the rebellion accidentally starts because people are like, well, if we could do this here, why couldn't we do it anywhere else? I also wanted the war for the Outer Rim to be more grueling than the Clone Wars because it became a war of attrition, which is just a grudge match of back and forth. Like, the Clone Wars could intervene, but it's not a focus of this particular story, as well as it's not something that I could see the CIS or Republic having any interest in. I hope you all enjoyed this story. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.